Christian, you talk about the compliance theatre, and I don't know if it was in the book or I've heard it on a podcast, but you spoke about, like, you know how when you go to, like, not that I hang around in bathrooms, I'm not that much in love with George, right? But but you know how when you go, like, you've got these things about how many times the rooms have been cleaned and all that sort of stuff. So you term that the compliance theatre. Just wonder if you've got some other examples. I could guarantee that every person in this room could talk about some of the things that have been done in the name of safety, just for the sake of it. Just wonder if you've got anything.
Yeah. So I talk about theatre, and I compliance theatre is just one example of a form of theatre. And what theatre is stuff that we do for performative reasons, right? We put something on so that we send a signal to people. And so I talk in the book about airport security, and I say, yes, of course, it's there to stop people, bad people taking things into the airport and therefore onto planes that we wouldn't want them to do that. But it's also there to make the average passenger feel safer. We know post 9/11 that people didn't want to fly because they thought it was dangerous. So airport security is, yes, it serves a purpose, but it's also made slightly inefficient in the sense that it's noticeable. And therefore, it has the effect of the average passenger feels safer. You can't forget that you've been through airport security, and the potential criminals are deterred, hopefully, from going through that process. So they make it slightly less efficient than it could be so that we notice it. And so there are lots of things out there in the real world that they might serve an underlying purpose, but they're also there for other reasons. And so the example you picked on there was those schedules that they have in toilets, that talk about, when was it last cleaned, and you can see that somebody sort of signed this thing, and so that is ostensibly that's there so that they can control how often the toilet was cleaned. But actually, there's another reason that they put it in public: clean the toilets. And the same thing with those little signs that you get that say members of staff must wash their hands, and you see that in restaurants sometimes. And there are some restaurants that put that sign in the customer toilets even when members of staff won't be using those toilets. Now, why do they do that? Well, number one is, if you see a member of staff that hasn't washed their hands, or you see that the toilet hasn't been cleaned according to the rota, looks dirty, gives you a rationale for, you can go and report it because they've said to you, this is the expectation that we have. And so it's a facilitation on customers to be able to report things. But the second thing it does is it also sends you a signal about how much they care about hygiene. And so the subliminal message is, we're saying that members of staff should wash their hands because we really care about this stuff. And the reason that matters in a restaurant situation is I can't see inside the kitchen. And so I can't see what they're doing in the kitchen, but I can see the toilet. So the toilets, in many respects, is a sort of subliminal proxy for how much do they care about cleanliness. And so if they put lots of signs up and send a signal, there's on some subliminal level, they're sending us a signal about the fact that they care about things, and therefore we can trust them in the kitchen, the bit that we can't see. And so this basic thing that looks like it's serving one purpose, and it does serve that purpose, actually has that subliminal message. And so we see lots of organizations doing clever things. Ridiculous alternative example from the restaurant industry is one of the things that at top restaurants, that you don't want people to be making lots of phone calls in, like a Michelin-starred restaurant. So, but it's patronizing to tell your customers to switch off their phones. So one French restaurant came up with a clever thing, which is, when people walk in, there was a sign which purported to be for customers coming out, saying, don't forget to switch your mobile phone back on. And that wasn't designed for that purpose at all. It's designed to send a signal to people coming in that what the average person in this place does is switches their phone off. And so they can tell you something quite patronizing without actually having to do it. And so there are lots of examples where we use theatre effectively, where we thought it through. But there's often times where we inadvertently put on performances, and we do things without really thinking about it and thinking about, well, what might the impression that we give for this particular thing is. So my view on theatre is we should deploy it really into, and I deliberately keep it broad because theatre can be different things in different contexts. Make sure that you understand your audiences, and it's plural because very often there can be multiple audiences that see it. So that might be the people that are setting out to do something bad might see it, or it might be the average employee. What we don't want to do is to confuse those. Recognize that if we are sending a signal to criminals or potential recidivists, that we might also be suggesting to the average employee that they're a recidivist. In the case of airport security, we've got the audience of the average passenger who just wants to go about their business, and we've got the bad guys and girls that we're trying to. And so we have to look at, are we sending signals to just one audience or several audiences? And let's understand what all of those audiences are thinking. Because in many cases, if we're not careful, we can target one audience successfully and irritate the hell out of another. And so I say step back and think about, when are we using theatre? Is this a good use of time? And is there an unintended audience? And does it still work for that audience? And so, lots of times we end up patronizing and irritating the hell out of people in order to get to like 5% of the population. I get really frustrated when I buy a cup of coffee from places like, Macca's, to use your terminology, what we call Macca's and McDonald's. Why do you get that stupid warning about caution may contain hot, the contents may be hot, right? Bloody obvious. I buy a coffee, of course it's going to be hot. I find that it doesn't matter that I find that irritating, because I'm still going to, if I'm buying coffee, I'm still going to do it. But there'll be other situations where something like that might irritate me enough for me not to do it. And so the people that they're trying to target, the very small minority of idiots who don't realize that coffee generally, when you buy it, is hot. Using theatre, why we're using it, and who the audiences are, can help us to be more effective.